what I'm going to be predicting now is that unfortunately the Russian Federation will use a nuclear weapon, tactical nuclear weapon against Ukraine in the next few weeks. Of course, that's a prediction. I'm not a prophet. I can't be certain that's true, but I'll get to my reasoning why I've come to believe that that is the case. Well, first of all, Putin has very strongly hinted he's going to do it. He's mentioned his nuclear weapons really from the very first day of the war, when the war seemed to be going reasonably well for Russia. The first several weeks, he stopped talking about it. Now it started to go really badly for the past month. He's upped the ante on nuclear rhetoric. The former president of Russia, Dmitry Medvedev, has talked about it. And Medvedev is not exactly yesterday's man. He's chairman of the National Security Council in Russia. So that is no mean source. And indeed, Ramzan Kadyrov, the president of Chechnya, he has publicly pleaded with Putin to use a nuclear weapon. Putin, just a few days ago, he announced that 4 Ukrainian districts, Kherson, Zaporizhia, Luhansk and Donetsk, have been integrated into the Russian Federation. And indeed, the Russian parliament is debating that right now. You can bet your bottom dollar that they're going to vote, say, yeah, it is now fully part of the Russian Federation. And then Putin has said there are citizens forever. So as you've seen, he will always double down and never back down. There were times some years ago he did back down, but in this conflict, he's only ever upped the ante. I mean, this Ukrainian war has been on in a sense since 2014. That no, he wouldn't do that. He wouldn't invade Crimea, and he did. He wouldn't try and seize Luhansk and Donetsk in 2014, and he did. He wouldn't declare Crimea part of Russia, and he did. That he wouldn't launch a full-scale war in 2022, and he did. That they wouldn't carry out large-scale massacres of civilians, 700 civilians murdered at a time, and they did. They wouldn't sort of deliberately target clinics and hospitals on dozens of occasions, and they did. That he wouldn't, call up hundreds of thousands of reservists, and they have 437,000. Remember, there was the 137,000 they called up a couple of weeks before the 300,000 reservists were called up. Obviously, some people they've actually drafted are not reservists at all, or men who've never done a day's military training. And people have poo-pooed this mobilization too much, saying be totally ineffectual. I mean, it'd be somewhat ineffectual, but some of them will have done a year's military service in the not too distant past. And the United States confirmed the other day that the first few of these draftees have reached the front line. It will help a bit. But Putin was obviously loath to do this because he knew there'd be a political backlash, and there has been. He waited till after the local elections, which obviously they cheated a lot, but he didn't want to cheat too blatantly. And especially before the elections, people are a bit politically engaged. The protests might have been even larger. He didn't want to have too many people fleeing the country. So anyway, and there's obviously that clause 7 of that mobilization decree signed by President Putin, and clause 7 still hasn't been published. Is widely noised that one calls for 1 million men to be drafted, not just 300,000. So as the conventional war is going badly, ironically, this makes it even more likely that he would resort to these ones. And when Joe Biden was asked in an interview what his message to Putin was about nuclear weapons, he said, don't. A bit of strategic ambiguity, but Jake Sullivan, lucky chap, he knew me many moons ago. He's Biden's national security advisor. He says, yes, there had been some behind-the-scenes diplomacy telling the Russians that they will be held to bay, specifying some of the repercussions if they do use a tactical nuclear weapon. And Russia's preparing the script for this months ago, false accusing Ukraine of developing nuclear weapons, as well as chemical weapons, biological weapons, complete lie without providing an ounce of corroboratory information about this. So anyway, Russia will presumably use one because if these districts are part of Russia, and Russia says they are, and they'll use any means to defend them, that impliedly means nuclear weapons. And Putin said he's not bluffing. Well, if he doesn't do it in a few weeks, then he is bluffing. And this is actually going to be a bit counterproductive for him, partly because, well, if Russia's going to treat Zaporizhia as part of Russia, then Ukraine might as well go and attack Belgorod, which is internationally recognized as part of Russia, because the consequences would be just the same for them. Anyway, it'd be very foolish of Russia to do this, but Putin has made many foolish moves in this war because the international backlash would be severe. Okay, NATO and EU countries they would be against. Turkey, the only NATO country that's trading normally with Russia, which allows air travel, no problem at all, they might change on that one. China, even they would get spooked, saying you'll set a precedent. If you can use a tactical nuclear weapon in a war, so that can the Americans, and some of the radiation will reach NATO and EU countries. General David Petraeus, this retired American general, formerly head of the CIA, he says at this point NATO might even intervene. Would they fight on the ground? Would they take out only in Ukraine, destroy Russian ground forces in Ukraine, and so on? So it would make things a lot worse. Would the Chinese stop trade, something like that? I mean, even if half of this happens, it's really bad for him without there being a concomitant battlefield advantage, because it would take out a few square kilometers, kill a few hundred Ukrainian soldiers, maybe a few thousand. But considering the Ukrainians have got about 1 million men and women under arms, that's not going to have war-winning consequences for them. It won't be the game changer that Putin would. And also NATO think they're going to have to be very firm about this one, because if he uses one battlefield nuclear weapon, gets away with it, why not 2 or 3 or 10 or 50? So this is a red line. 1945, those 2 nuclear bombs were dropped on Japan. They've never been used since in any conflict, however bad it's been going for either side. And obviously nuclear weapon states have been involved in many, many conflicts. India, Pakistan, the United Kingdom, France, Russia itself, the Soviet Union when it existed, and so on. North Korea, in a sense, firing at South Korea, Israel, and others. So it would be bad news for them. So, but I think, as I say, I think he will do it, because otherwise he looks feeble. That's what he most despises. Look at the late Nikolai Gorbachev. That's why he really looks down on Gorbachev for not being firmer, maybe nuking Afghanistan. He might have seen that as a solution. And he's got few cards left to play. Because, okay, so mobilize 437,000 men over the last month, but they won't have uniforms with them or boots with them or helmets with them. They have enough for some men, but not all of them, or weapons or tanks they bring out of warehouses haven't been maintained for decades. A lot of the officers are killed, and the NCOs have got like almost no discretion in the Russian army, just for passing orders down the chain of command. So you need to train these people, because war is more technological than ever. And fascinating that this retired Russian Air Force officer was recently saying, he's against the war partly because it's attacking their brother nation, the Ukrainians, but it's just unwinnable now, and they don't have enough trained men, and you can't rush people through training. This is not using a spear or a sword as in centuries ago, or even a musket as in 200 years ago. These are actually quite sophisticated weapons or communication systems, and because the Ukrainians are streets ahead on that one. The Ukrainians have also taken on the psychology of winners. So the trouble is, if Putin uses one, in for a penny, in for a pound, if the repercussions will be just as grave for using one as using 100, well, then you might as well use 100. Some of the radiation will affect Western Russia as well, and his ally Belarus. So it would be a really imbecilic thing to do. But he might see no other way out. And of course, the war hawks on his side are constantly saying that Russia has not been aggressive enough, and Putin is in danger from being overthrown by them. I'd love to see, mass protests bring him down, a free government come to free the Russians to end this illegal war of aggression against Ukraine. I don't think it's likely. The trouble is the hawks. They're the ones close to the levers of power. Senior army officers, officers of the intelligence agency, like the FSB, like the SVR, and so on. And they're the ones who are in place who could actually oust him. And some of them, as I say, would be even worse. And it mightn't be tactical nuclear weapons they would use. There'd be worse ones. So it's difficult to see a way out of this. Remember, a few months ago, the buzz phrase was off-ramp. Okay, how can we give him a way to back down without humiliating him? He gained something, got something to show for all the thousands of Russians have been killed, probably the tens of thousands now, a little bit of land, Ukraine agreed not to join NATO, bring back the Russian language with co-official status or something like that, or some liminal status for Eastern Ukraine. But, he's not accepting any of that. And he's really backed himself into a corner, because the Russian constitution has an article in it which he put in there in 2020 via referendum, saying that Russia can never give away 8 millimeter of its territory. So then he's got to fight to the end for these territories. So that's it. I would really like to be proven wrong, but so something's going to happen. There could be total sanctions, which is why Western countries haven't got 100% the sanctions, as in will not buy or sell any food, any medicines, any medical equipment, that kind of thing. Might be no Russians allowed in at all. Those $300 billion of Russian government assets, in the Western banks, could be confiscated, used with the Ukrainians, and on and on. So that's it. Unfortunately, I think he's stupid enough to do it. Part of me is hoping he's playing the madman, a bit like Nixon over Vietnam. So we don't know, is he going to do this? Is he not? And we're so scared that he might, that therefore we back down and give him what he wants. Right, thank you for watching my channel. Make sure you subscribe on Patreon. You can get access to a lot more that you can't see here. And please donate to me on Patreon. I'm georgefromireland.there or PayPal georgecallahan79@gmail.com. Goodbye.